welcome to Creating Solid Video Content. I'm James, and I'll be your guide throughout the course of this video. Our goal today is to give you some tips and tricks when shooting video with the intention of displaying it on the internet. Since every person is going to be using different equipment, everything we present today is structured around minimal equipment with an emphasis on composition and execution. We will divide the course into two main sections, the first being planning of the video, and the second being the execution of the video. And by the end of this video, we will have covered how to plan, shoot, prepare for an editor, and post a video with minimal equipment. So without further mucking about, let's go. The most important phase in the conception of a video is the planning of a video. In this section, we will go over how to create a video using such tools as planning, composition, storyboards, and an equipment list. We're also going to discuss how to use them effectively. Personally, when I start a video, the first thing I do is write out an objective paragraph. Just a few lines to help keep me and the purpose of the video in focus and to help avoid diving down rabbit holes. For example, my objective for this video was, I plan to create a video covering the knowledge to compose a solid art lesson. I plan to include the use of planning, composition, editing, and equipment. The goal of this exercise is to simplify the approach to the video. So keep this handy. While considering your objectives, we're going to imagine what you would like your video to look like. This exercise is to help us visualize what our video could be without limitations on equipment and time. Our ideal video, so to speak. When you draw up your plan, whether it be physical or mental, try to envision performances that have inspired or captivated you. You'll want to consider doing research, if you haven't already, on other artists that do what you might, or close to it. Take notes on lighting, angles, and the styles that they best use to convey their point. We may have seen these videos before, but looking at them again with fresh eyes may bring to light new ideas. The next piece of the process we're going to examine is an equipment list. This will vary from person to person, so try not to be timid about what you do have, but focus on doing what you can with what you have. First, what camera do you plan on using? Do you have more than one? Remember, your phone, a tablet, some laptops, all have cameras that you can use. So let's list the cameras. The next question is, how do you intend to capture your audio? Are you using a separate recorder or the audio from your phone or PC? Most phones have a recording program if you need to collect audio separately. Next, let's figure out how we're going to mount your camera. If you have a tripod, go ahead and list it. If you do not have a tripod, there are plenty of options with a little ingenuity and some things around the house that you can use. A wire coat hanger bent into the shape of a U with the hanger still attached can provide a versatile mount for your camera and will give you the ability to hang it in multiple places. It's also one of my favorite tools for guerrilla photography. This apparatus will allow you to shoot from above a subject, capturing different angles just by giving the wires a little bit of bend. Also, a little duct tape, a stack of books on a stool, or even a water bottle to prop up your camera can get the job done. The goal here is a steady shot, so the more you secure your camera, the steadier your shot will be. Also, keep in mind that putting a camera on the surface in which you're working may cause vibrations, and that movement may end up in your recording. So the next entry on our list will be the items we're going to be using for our demo. Art supplies, instruments, display materials, etc. All the things that you might need. The reason we are listing our art supplies is a matter of efficiency. Having everything you need within reach of your set will decrease both the amount of takes needed for filming, and it will keep your mind focused on the project at hand. Whether you're painting or performing a dance, have the supplies you need close at hand. Not having these items can cause production to slow and result in inconsistencies in your video. The next piece of equipment that we'll add to our list will be set supplies, such as background and lighting. For background, consider the simpler your background, the more focus will be on you and the task you're performing. A background can be a wall in your home, a sheet from the linen cupboard, or if you're outside, the environment itself. Don't be afraid to get creative with your environment as well. Just don't go overboard and draw attention away from yourself. Pay attention as well to your wardrobe while you're filming, because the correct use of complementary colors can further allow you to stand out from the background. But too much detail in your outfit or your attire and it can cause you to become flat and possibly recede into the background. A white shirt is almost always a bad idea. It reflects light and it can make it harder for the camera to focus on the subject. And while we're speaking of lighting, the last thing we're going to discuss for our equipment list will be lighting. Normally in an interview or a demo, your goal is to have a steady gradient of light across the entire set. To achieve this, you would normally use three-point lighting, possibly in conjunction with any natural light. In three-point lighting, the first and the brightest light is called the key light, which normally sits in front of the subject behind the camera and is offset from the subject by 45 degrees and level with your subject. The second brightest light is called the backlight and is set up outside the frame directly opposite of the key light. It is used to light the rear of the subject. The third and least brightest light is the fill light, which is set up in front like the key light but on the opposite side of the camera and is used to soften any shadows cast by the key light. With this traditional setup, you can set up a smooth gradient across your subject and set, allowing for the camera to capture light more efficiently. While I know not everyone will have the equipment to do three-point lighting, there are some creative ways to use the lighting and equipment around you. First, let's talk about how lighting affects the subject on the set so we can better understand how to control it. A direct light to the face or the front of the subject will enhance details like wrinkles, cracks, chins. If the light is too dim, then we will not see the distinct features in their face. When lighting a subject with a backlight, overuse can cause features to seem hazy, washed out, even giving them a halo effect. On the other extreme, too little backlight and your background will be lit, but your subject may appear as a silhouette with very few features. Next, the fill light. It's the most subtle, and it helps cut down on cast shadows from the key light, preventing contrast on the subject's face and preventing distortion. We also want to pay attention to how high we place our lights, because if we place them lower, it extends the length of the subject's face higher, and vice versa. If we put the light higher, we extend the length down and possibly turn one chin into two. What if by chance you're only dealing with natural light? In most cases, natural light is too direct. So consider changing your set position or creating a diffuser to dampen the light, possibly by hanging a sheet over the window. Another option is to redirect the light using a bounce card. A bounce card is usually constructed of either white or a reflective surface. The reflective surface will give you control of a direct light source, whereas the white card will be a more diffused light and more ambient. For example, say like in my studio, you have high windows and a direct light from the sun. You may balance that by laying a white sheet on the ground to simulate a fill light as it bounces the light onto the subject. Lighting in itself can change the mood for your video quite easily, and considering the color of your light should always be in the back of your mind. While natural light seems to give us the clearest images, please remember that breaking these rules can also add effect and stylization to your video if you understand how they work. Take a look around your place and remember any lamp can be turned into lighting. You may have to diffuse the light by placing paper over the front. Be inventive, be observant, but most of all be careful. Lights heat up and paper is flammable. So with that, let's add our lighting to the list. To recap on our equipment list, first we have cameras. Second, we have our camera mount, whether it's a tripod, a wire hanger, or a stack of books. Next, we have whatever materials you're using for your demo, whatever your art calls for. Lastly, we have set equipment, which includes background, lighting, and any props that you may need. The last section of planning will be concentrated on composition and storyboards. This is where note cards or a piece of paper will come in handy, and where you're going to visually describe the course of your video. There are some things we need to keep in mind when filming that will influence the way we compose a scene. This is also where you're going to start making notes for the editor. When shooting your video, consider not segmenting your subject. Let me explain. When framing your subject, if you cut them off at the edge of the frame at a major body joint, it subconsciously reminds the viewer of dismemberment. So it's good practice when framing a person you do not cut them off the neck, knees, waist, or so on. Try breaking your frame at the thighs, stomach, upper arms, or calves and shins. The next composition tool I want to share with you is the rule of thirds. First, for this rule to work, we have to mention that when you're filming, try to maintain a screen ratio that will transfer to bigger screens. So when you're filming, try to film with your phone in landscape as opposed to portrait. Okay, so the rule of thirds, well, hold on. Let's put this up on the screen. The rule of thirds is where you divide the screen into 9 equal sections with 2 horizontal and vertical lines. The theory being that the center-orientated images are static, and it's more pleasing to the eye when the action or the subject is framed on the intersection of those lines. Having the action on the intersection of those lines can be used in various ways. For example, if a subject is reciting verse on the left 2 points, but is facing left or out of the frame, you can create visual interest off the screen. So it's implied that there's something that has captured the subject's attention that we cannot define. Now, if the same person is reciting verse and they are facing inward toward the right or in towards the frame, it causes the eye to follow the subject's gaze and explore the scene. And if the background is blank, the subject may even appear introspective. Simply turning your body and adjusting where you stand can change the feel of your video. Let's think of Bob Ross as an example. He always used his left 2 points in his wide shots for himself, and his right 2 points for his easels and his paintings. There are also places where it's an advantage to break these rules. For example, with pottery and working on a wheel, eccentric composition can be mesmerizing. It all depends on how you adapt your medium to your demo, how you compose your shots, and the best advice I can give you is do research and watch examples of people with similar mediums, then pro and con the video and adapt what works and is visually pleasing. The last thing we'll do in the planning stage is to create a storyboard depicting the different scenes that will occur during the shooting of your video. For this exercise, you can use note cards or just a piece of paper. The storyboard is also something you can use to start your editing notes. When creating a storyboard, don't make it complicated. Use stick figures and basic shapes just to get your point across. Your storyboard should start with the text that you plan to have in the beginning of your video, opening credits, titles, your name. Then proceed to your opening scene. Where are you placed? Where are your supplies at? How's your set up? Since your storyboard identifies what path you would like your video to take, anytime you come to a cut in your video, start a new card. Also, since your cards serve as your notes, I suggest possibly outlining your dialogue for your scenes on the back of your cards. I'm a big fan of not reading directly from a script, but more of having notes. It tends to have a more natural feel to the performance. It does help to have your notes close by. Scene by scene, go through and make a card for each. If there's a change in the set, put it in there. If there's a change in the lighting, put it in there. Change to the camera angles, put it in there. And don't forget, at the end of your storyboard, don't forget end credits or your endorsements, like a special thank you to, or funded by. Once you have completed your storyboard all the way through to the end credits, and made notes for dialogue on the back, then we will sort them out by scenes, and we can shoot them without changing the set, even though it might not be temporally correct. This is to save us time when shooting. The more scenes you can run through without having to break down the set and change the scenes, the more time you'll have to get viable takes. The storyboard also serves as a good tool for rehearsal, and I cannot stress this enough. Rehearse, rehearse, rehearse. The more time you spend running lines on set, the better it appears. It's time to film. You have your camera set up, your lighting in place, and a great new tool in your storyboard. The next step is to familiarize yourself with the apps you plan to use while you're filming. It's important that you know these programs inside and out. That way you can accomplish your task with minimal resistance. For instance, it would behoove us to have the ability to lock focus and exposure instead of using autofocus. That way, if you're filming alone, it doesn't bite you. It is also a benefit to lock exposure lest you have shots that come out too light or too dark. I have tried several platforms and devices, and all of them have the ability to lock focus and exposure, but some took some effort to find. With this vocabulary, you should be able to look up the functions of your device and reference using these features. You also want to check how you're saving your files and whether you're saving your files as .raw, .mp4, or .mov. .raw, it's lossless, it's cleaner, but MOV and MP4 files can be edited just as well. When capturing your video, I find it's best to do what I call shooting straight through. This is when you're doing your takes, do not stop and start the camera, but roll straight through, marking your takes and doing as many takes as it requires to get it right. Try this method while doing a rehearsal take. This gives you a chance to proof your method before rolling on a real take. When you're shooting, it's important that you mark the beginning of your scene. To do this, simply clap and announce the scene and take number. Then pause for a short time and give the editor room to trim the scene. This will help whoever's editing your clips immensely. Armed with your note cards, run through your first scene and record it. When doing a rehearsal scene, make sure to simulate the motions you intend to use in your scene. At the end of the scene, review the footage. You'll want to make a note of a few things. First, how's your audio? Can you hear yourself clearly? Do you need to move closer to the mic as the narrator? Maybe move instruments away from the mic. Next, examine if you're in the right section of the frame according to the rule of thirds, or are you using more centric composition? Then evaluate whether your lighting is effective. Do I have sharp contrasts or shadows? Can I see the whole scene, or am I shooting too much? Am I existing in the frame? It's good to note the boundaries of the frame so you don't exit the frame and have to reshoot. I tend to mark the boundaries of the frame with tape on the floor so I know where to exist in the frame. It's also a good idea to mark where you'll be in the frame to help with the consistency of the shot. After your rehearsal, and after you've made the necessary adjustments, you're ready to roll hot and capture your scene. Remember, review your storyboard and organize your shots so you can capture all the scenes needed before changing your set and your props. Also, when you start filming and you're delivering your lines, be kind to your editor, and in the places you would like your cuts, leave a bit of room so the editor can get a clean clip from your takes. Like when you're cutting to a photo or a graph, or maybe even another speaker. Take a breath and pause so the editor has about a second between the next line of speech to complete a clean cut or transition. The last thing we want to do before moving on to the next scene is to review your footage. I cannot stress this enough. Always review your footage before you change your set. Many a regret has been expressed by people who have not taken the time to review their footage. While you're reviewing your footage, make notes on your storyboard. Which takes are the best? Where do you need to make changes? Maybe reshoot? And with that in mind, proceed with your shoot. And use your storyboard as a shot list. That way you ensure you get all the shots that you need. Some of you will be sending in your footage to be edited, while some of you will be editing your footage yourself. For those of you sending in your footage, I would suggest making good use of your storyboard and make as many notes as possible to convey your vision for your video. Making notes while you're shooting your video will help an editor when they edit your video. First, the more notes you make for an editor, the clearer the intention for your video will be, and without notes, your clips may end up as a completely different order than you intended. Next, mark your scenes with a clap and a call out for the scene and the take in the beginning. Then mark the end of your scene by saying, "Cut." This gives the editor an idea of when to start and stop your scene. If you can, try only to send the takes you would like to use to your editor. If you cannot, the more elaborate your accompanied notes should be. Next, when you're uploading your files, especially to send to an editor, name them appropriately. Something like demo, scene 1, take 2, and your name. That may coordinate with the notes on your storyboard. This will group your files together on the computer and be a huge time saver for you and your editor. For those of you editing on your own, whether you're editing on your phone or PC or with advanced software, there are a few ways to increase your efficiency and clean up your video. Editing is all about intuition. If you don't think it looks right, it probably doesn't. With that in mind, there are 2 apps that you can use for free to edit your footage: Snapseed for Google and iMovie for Apple. And both have all the features we have discussed in this video. Again, the first thing you'll want to do with these apps is go through and familiarize yourself with their functions. That way you can manipulate your footage as needed. Depending on which app you're using to edit, the next sequence of events may change order. First, name your files in a way that organizes them and makes sense to you. Now that you have a naming system, start to review your footage and rough cut the scenes for takes you intend to use. While you're doing this, try to leave yourself enough room to add transitions and tighten up your footage later. After you have all your footage trimmed, transfer it to your timeline in order according to your storyboard. Next, watch the footage, verify your narrative is intact, and if necessary, adjust your clips accordingly. With these elements assembled, you now have the bare bones of your video, and the next task is to decide what cuts or transitions you wish to make in your video. These can help set the pace and the tone of your video. There are so many ways to make cuts that we should do research if there's a certain cut or transition you wish to use and how to do it. Cuts and transitions can help not only set the tone, but they can help cover a mistake as well. A well-placed cut can help eliminate a flubbed line or an awkward action. Some of the programs will have pre-programmed transitions. Use them sparingly and they can be effective, but overuse them and they can draw attention away from your narrative. With this in mind, there are multiple combinations available, so it is important to research and find examples of cuts and transitions. This way, you can use them effectively in your video. Adding text and graphics can add a serious piece to the puzzle, which is your video. Text can be used to clarify information throughout the duration of your video, but much like transitions, it can be overused. So it's important to use text when it's necessary. A few things to look out for when you're editing yourself. First, text should not be placed over the subject's face, especially when talking. Second, it's one of the few items you can utilize that can break the rule of thirds. Text can exist in the middle of the frame, or it can be made more dynamic by using the rule of thirds. Also consider color, size, font, and placement are all things that you should be thinking about when you're designing your text. The goal is to try to make the text match the feel of your video. Next, we have photos and infographics. If you're planning to insert photos or graphs into your video, 300 dpi is the resolution you are shooting for. If you're sending an image to the editor, the cardinal rule is the larger the image, the better it'll appear on screen. When you send your image or photo to an editor for placement, the more descriptive your notes, the better. For example, you might say, upper left-hand corner, 1/9 the size of the frame, from 10 minutes and 22 seconds to 10 minutes and 45 seconds of scene 4. If you're editing yourself, remember, it's easier to condense an image than it is to enlarge it. So the bigger it is, the better it views. A couple things to remember when you're adding text or infographics to your composition. First, always try to give the viewer enough time to comprehend your graphic. There's nothing more frustrating than watching a video and a chart or graphic appears and then disappears real quick. Read your graphic to yourself, then add a few moments. That way it can be taken in without rushing. Next, make your graphics simple and readable. People watching on their phones will not be able to discern small details at that scale. And if the goal is the communication of information, we need it to be as readable as possible. Now that you've assembled all these visual pieces, review your video and ensure the placement of your text and graphics. Once all of that is in place, you can move on to your audio. Before you consider adding extra audio to your video, you'll want to review whether or not you have clear audio in the clips you're sending to the editor or the ones you're constructing yourself. If you have a separate audio source or a second mic that you've used, make sure your mark is clear so that the audio can be aligned later. If you do not have clear audio in your initial clips, adding extra audio will only clutter up your video. Initially, you'll want to find a song or sound effects that accent the attitude and the mood you have been cultivating throughout your video. If you're sending in sound effects to an editor, the same rules apply as with text and graphics. Be as detailed as possible. If you're editing it yourself, ideally you want to look for royalty-free music. Music is a stylistic choice, and like cuts, the right music can control the pace of your video. A fast-paced song equals a fast-paced video. A slow-paced song equals a slow-paced video. You want to observe whether your track complements or fights the overall feeling for your video. For example, in instructional videos, it helps to have a subtle but well-timed audio track. Too complex, and it can pull attention away from the scene and detract from information you're trying to convey. As you progress, you'll want to review your video with each change and then tighten the audio much like you would tighten the visual elements. You want to eliminate the gaps and the pauses. Once you've reviewed placement, adjust your overall levels and make sure it fits your narrative of your video. Also, while you're adjusting these overall levels, make sure your background music doesn't drown out your speech, but that they complement each other. It may take some experimentation to accomplish this feat in your phone, but the features are there. Now that you've completed your video, it's time to export your video and send in your clips. When exporting your clips or video, remember the format you're looking for is .mp4 or .mov. Once you've exported your files, if you're sending in your clips, please remember your notes to the editor and any information that may be helpful in the construction of your video. With that, we've come to the end of our journey. I hope this video has been helpful, and I wish you all the best in your cinematic endeavors. Bye now.